is very consistent and very loyal to the agenda, and is a presence that I think is very important to have in the White House. And I consider him, and secondly, and a very dear friend, and someone that I work with every second of the day, and actually I cherish his friendship.
Yeah, you know, I can run a little hot on occasions. And Reince is indefatigable. I mean, it's low-key, but it's determination. The thing I respect most, and the only way this thing works, is Reince is always kind of steady. He's got Katie and some other people around him. It's very steady, but his job is by far one of the toughest jobs I've ever seen in my life. To make it run every day, to make the trains, and you only see the surface. What's going on underneath and planning what's 3 weeks down the road to the degree that we're planning it, of all these EOs and legislation and, you know, whether it's a tax reform bill. Reince is indefatigable in saying, we got to drive this forward, we got to drive this forward. And I think it's one of the reasons we have such a, and by the way, this started back in August. Yeah. When we had this campaign where we were outgunned, outmanned, you know, outspent, and it was because President Trump had a message, he had this charisma, and he had people like here at CPAC, and we just put our heads down, and that's what, and Reince has been unwavering since the very first moment I met him.
Okay, and that was White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus and White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon at CPAC earlier today, giving some insight into their relationship and the inner workings of the Trump administration. And joining us now with reaction is Fox News contributor and host of the Bill Bennett podcast. Now listen, you can listen to this and subscribe to his brand new free podcast dedicated to, quote, translating Trump on iTunes. Bill Bennett, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get your reaction to this joint CPAC appearance. It was quite interesting. Everybody was tuning in with a lot of discussion about what's going on. Are there different factions in the administration? You have the two top guys in there. Does this put to rest the theory that Priebus and Bannon don't get along?
Well, it should, but I doubt that it will. I love Reince, but we've seen Reince before, Kimberly. But Steve Bannon, this was kind of a sunlight debut for Steve Bannon. No, look, they're different guys, but they get along very well. And I must say, this was the right kind of debut for Steve Bannon. I mean, I think you know him a little bit. The guy was direct, but not dark. He was straightforward, but not sinister. He was candid, but not, you know, scary. And so I think he did fine. Obviously, a very smart guy, operating at a high level and engaged in a high-level argument, which no doubt the media and the corporatists, as he called them, will now take up. Are there going to be rivalries in the White House? Of course. Will there be differences of opinion between the chief of staff and the chief strategist? Of course. I mean, I remember, you know, being a mere Secretary of Education, being summoned to the White House many times because of disagreements. It was usually because I wanted a lower budget and some of President Reagan's people wanted a higher budget, but Ronald Reagan always fixed that. But no, these are strong men with strong points of view. The issues are tough. The load is incredible, and so there will be differences. But I thought it was just fine and a good idea.
Probably a good idea. You're right, because otherwise there's been a lot of sort of public discourse about it. We've seen things on Saturday Night Live and otherwise. This man then went forward to speak on his own behalf. Steve Bannon did, someone who was such a big part of the movement across this country, the Trump movement, that brought out in droves the working class men and women of America that thought that they were forgotten. So it's nice to perhaps hear from someone who's on the inside. And talk to me a little bit about, you know, the messaging and now the movement and direction of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, well, I think it is a conservative Trump party, a Trump conservative party. A little bit different coloration, a little bit different emphasis. But there's a clear intellectual base to this. You can accuse Steve Bannon, I guess, of a lot of things, maybe gratuitously after today, but he's very, very smart, as is Reince Priebus. You saw a lot of enthusiasm there at C-SPAN, at CPAC, too. What I thought was key, Kimberly, I don't know if you thought this, was that Matt Schlapp, who was the host, and Reince both talked about the fusion of conservatism and the Republican Party, and that is a kind of unstoppable force. I don't know if it's always unstoppable, but it's pretty formidable. And you remember all the gnashing of teeth and rending of garments during the campaign. If Trump should be elected, it would be a total split of conservatism and republicanism. It's not. It's finding its way, and again, there will still be disagreements. But the dog, what's the old saying? The dogs bark, but the caravan moves forward. The dogs are barking. I thought that was, by the way, was very interesting too, what Bannon had to say about the press. If you think the press, the mainstream media, will give up this country without a fight, you got another thing coming.
Yeah, it really was
right about
kind
that.
of a call to arms to say you cannot rest on your laurels. If you want this movement to continue forward and the president to enact his agenda that he was voted in on wholeheartedly, you're going to have to fight for it. Do you think that was a significant unifying message and moment to try and kind of pit this movement against the mainstream media?
I think it was. I think it was reassuring to people. Again, simply the presence of those two together was a good thing. But then I think, like a kind of call to arms and for perseverance in this effort. They're going to go after Donald Trump every day. One of the things that happened for me today, I hope you don't mind me mentioning this.
Sure.
You talked about similarities between these two guys. We had this podcast that's now out with Mike Pence, Vice President Pence. And he talked about the awe, how awestruck he is with the job, with the burdens, the responsibilities, with the history. We followed that with a podcast interview with Steve Wynn, Steve Wynn of Wynn Resorts in Las Vegas and elsewhere. And Wynn described going through a tour of the White House with Donald Trump. And he said, the most reassuring thing to me was to see how awestruck, how respectful Donald Trump was of that White House and its history. So that to me as a citizen is a very good sign. These guys know what a big deal this is, what they are part of. They take it very seriously, and as well they should. I'm glad to be part of this, even if it's an onlooker of the train.
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. And Steve Bannon, of course, with that big job raising all the money as a finance chair now for the party going forward. Dr. Bennett, we look forward to your podcast. Congratulations, and 2 already key interviews there, so we're excited about it. Pence, Wynn, and I believe also you'll have Steve Bannon coming up. So, Dr. Bennett, thank you so much.
That's right.
We'll get that on iTunes.